all these people. Wonderful to see you all. Okay. Fisha. Hello, sweetheart. Okie dokie. So what do we do? How do we start?
Would you like the prayers, Venerable Robina?
I think we should start. It's auspicious to do that. Yep, it's auspicious to say a prayer or two. Yep. So we think we're going to listen to these teachings. We're going to listen, think about the meaning. I am certainly as well, even though I'm talking. Listen, think about, analyze, contemplate, internalize some of it. And it's kind of slowly, like everything. It's not magic overnight. It's slowly, you know. The concepts are the stepping stone to the actual experience. We've got to start somewhere. So we start where we are, which is our concepts, thoughts, words. So we're going to listen. So we can. This prayer is saying that. We're saying this prayer is saying, we'll say it in English, think these thoughts until we are enlightened. We're going to rely upon the Buddha, his teachings, and the community of people supporting us in our practice, the spiritual community. And so by the virtuous karma we create, by listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha so we can really, truly benefit all sentient beings. That's what we're saying. Sangye charan soke chognam la jancho badu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chönyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drubha shog sangye charan soke chognam la jancho badu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chönyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drubha shog. All right, that'll do. Good. Okay, so we've been talking about these last few weeks. This approach, this Buddhist, the teachings, you could, like postgraduate, in other words. It's such a good analogy, junior school, high school, university, postgraduate. So all the Lam Rim, this presentation of Lama Tsongkhapa's teachings based upon a Tisha in the 11th century, of course coming all from the great vast body of knowledge of Buddha's teachings, especially from the great Nalanda tradition, which is what His Holiness always talks about. This amazing monastic university that flourished 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th century in India. Amazing place. All the greatest thinkers and scholars, this is carried on. Really, it died out. I mean, unfortunately, it was when things come along, things happened, and Buddhism died out around the 11th, 12th century. Nalanda Monastery was destroyed, but it actually didn't die out. It continued in Tibet. It's a living tradition in Tibet. It's not called Nalanda anymore, but all the time His Holiness talks about the Nalanda tradition. So the buildings burned down in Tibet, but in India, or by the 8th and 9th century, they're already flourishing. 8th, 9th, 10th century, from Padmasambhava onwards, flourishing in Tibet, and still flourishing now out of Tibet. How long that'll last, who knows? But all the great scholars, all the great Indian, the great lamas, when they left Tibet in 59, their most urgent job was to find places, find land, where they could build their monasteries again, where they could carry on the experiential lineages to the minds of the younger students, So now it's in South India. The Indian government was so kind to the Tibetans. His Holiness never stops thanking them for helping them, bring alive Buddhism, continuing it in India. And now here it is in the West. How alive it is, not sure, but we're certainly sincere. So Buddhism, developed in different countries, didn't it? First in India, all the traditions in India, all the sutra teachings, all the Mahayana teachings, all the Hinayana teachings, all the Tantrayana teachings, all came from India. And then different parts of them went to the different countries. So the only country that seems, from what I know, seems to have all, from junior school to high school, university, postgraduate, all the stages of the sutra teachings, Hinayana and Mahayana and the Vajrayana, it seems to be Tibet. And still extant among those great beings, including His Holiness and the others, So like any body of knowledge, whether you're starting grade 1 or you're at the most advanced level of postgraduate, the topic's the same, isn't it? It starts with the simple aversion, goes to the more sophisticated until you get to the most advanced. Same here. So what's the job we're trying to do by being a Buddhist? Whether you're practicing Tantra, practicing postgraduate, practicing university, practicing junior school or high school, what is the job? Well, the goal, if you're in the whole deal, you've got the whole package and you're heading off to postgraduate, the job is to become a Buddha. Buddha. Bud, the etymology is very tasty. Bud implies the eradication from our mind of all delusions, all misconceptions, all the nonsense, all the disturbing emotions, all the nonsense of ego. And da implies the development to perfection of all the goodness, all the clarity, all the intelligence, all the kindness, all the goodness. Because this is implying already. It's almost so simple. It's extraordinary, actually, if we really get it. This is telling us the methodology from junior school to postgraduate. If it is true, we can rid the mind of the rubbish, and if it is true, we can develop to perfection all the goodness and the virtue and the wisdom, which is the Buddhist approach. Then we obviously need to know that what they are, how to distinguish. And that's the job of being a Buddhist. From here to Buddhahood, all the way. And the purpose of all the teachings, junior school, high school, university, postgraduate, is to get us to that. That's it. Not complicated concept. It's not a complicated concept. It doesn't take quite a few lifetimes, that's all. But once you get the idea clear and know there's a map there, then you kind of relax, Just tick the boxes as you go. So the reason you do a Tara mantra is so you can become a Buddha. The reason you control your body and speech and live in vows is so you can become a Buddha. The reason you look into your mind and try to get rid of attachment is so you can become a Buddha. The reason you develop bodhichitta is so you can become a Buddha. They're all the same. They're just different approaches, different areas of practice that we need to perfect, that's all. So when we understand the whole package, we understand, like any package of knowledge, body of knowledge, you understand the levels and you understand what comes first and what comes second and what comes next. Once we can get that down intellectually, once we can understand this lam rim in this way, you can kind of relax. But the trouble is, for us, especially us modern people, and when I first heard the lam rim, those teachings from Lama Zopa, I was completely and profoundly confused. Even once I became a nun, I knew it was my path. I knew I was going to become a nun. It was crystal clear. I became a nun. I knew I wanted to get on with work. So I started working for Wisdom Publications. And I remember editing Pabonka Rinpoche's Liberation in the palm of your hand. We got the manuscript in the late 70s. And I started working on it. It didn't get published until after I left in the 80s. But still, I remember editing it. And I was just this utter confusion, this massive tome of these confusing concepts. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. I knew it was my path, but I had no idea what it meant. It was utterly confusing because it's this amazing, presentation directly coming from the, Tsongkhapa in the 14th century, practically in the same language. Tibet culturally hardly had changed in 1,000 years. And in a way, that's excellent. They didn't get degenerate, They didn't degenerate. The lamas, even now the lamas, when you hear a very traditional Tibetan lama, when he's talking, you'll think he's in the 14th century, the way he talks. Because they kept this knowledge so alive, in Tibet, up on the other side of those mountains. The Catholics went there in the 14th century, all the Jesuits. They even translated the Bible into Tibetan. They gave up. They couldn't get one Tibetan. There are a few Muslims, apparently. In Kathmandu, there's this amazing Muslim acupuncturist. She's trained in Beijing. She's very tall, unusual for Tibetans. She's very somber, She's a Muslim from Lhasa. There's 2.5 Muslims, a few Muslims in Lhasa. She's from Lhasa. And she's this incredible acupuncturist. Everybody in town loves her. She's about 80-something now. Fatima, you call her Fatima. She's an incredible doctor. But in Chinese style, how we Westerners like to have our room all private with nice music and low lights and incense, and the doctor's all gentle and sweet. Well, these Chinese doctors are unbelievable. She has 2 rooms, one room full of men, one room full of women, and her little helpers who kind of massage you first. And she doesn't have to take your pulses. She doesn't have to, all she has to do is look at you from the distance on the other side, and she comes and kind of stabs you with these needles. And she's unbelievable. People cry out. But she's the most incredible acupuncturist, I tell you. If you want the best acupuncturist, go to Kathmandu. But she just, I'd scream in pain sometimes. She's just ruthless with the way she put the needles in. She never took your pulses. That would be so demeaning. She just looks at you. She understands, She knows exactly what's going on. Anyway, she's a Muslim and she's from Lhasa. That was hardly the point, was it? But I'm gossiping tonight. So the thing is, whatever you study, whatever you do, whatever it's Tantra or Sutra or, whatever it is, Whether you prostrate, whether you say a mantra, whether you learn a theory, whether you think about emptiness, whether you think about bodhichitta, whether you think about renunciation, it's all for the same purpose. It's all for the same purpose. To help you rid the mind of the rubbish and grow the goodness until eventually you become a Buddha. That's it. I mean, I swear to you, that's it. Once you know that, once you know that's the point of it all, then you can start to get your head around it. You know, that's it. Bottom line. The word, the end result, tells you the job to be done. So that means, in other words, Tantra, which looks so weird to us. I mean, when we first see all these amazing, we call it iconography, we call it art. I mean, for some reason, I don't know, people love Tibetan art. I mean, you don't go to many galleries and see art of Jesus and Joseph and the saints, you know. It's sort of seen as childish, but people love Tibetan art. I don't know why. It's so odd. Because it's foreign, I suppose. I don't know. But it's psychology. Everything in Buddhism is psychology. If it's not psychology, no, it's not all psychology, but it leads to the mind. Everything is to help you change your mind to become the mind of a Buddha. So there are different approaches. So what the mind of a Buddha consists of, is only the virtues, the goodnesses, the clarity and kindness and love and compassion and wisdom. That's it. We all know those words, but Buddha's got his own very distinct approach to it. So that's the goal, to end up with that totally, and all the other stuff gone. Anger, jealousy, fear, a sense of a neurotic, selfless, poor, lonely, self-pity, me, all the other rubbish. That's all gone. We think, it's a very shocking idea because we think in our culture that's a normal part of a normal person. So normal, you'd be weird if you didn't have anger, and if you didn't have attachment, and if you didn't have depression, and if you didn't have anxiety. That's a very depressing view. Buddha says this is a dreadful view. These are mental illnesses. I mean, we can get rid of them. He's found a method. So then the thing is, the job is to get rid of the delusions. If the job is to get rid of the delusions and grow the goodness, you think, well, let's just do it. Let's get on with it, please. Well, I'm sorry, it's a bit difficult. Why? Because they've been in our mind for eons, Buddha says, which is a bit shocking to us, but they've been in our mind for eons. And to the point where these misconceptions, which have the aspect, these neurotic states of mind have two functions. We learned this in high school. One is they're deeply disturbing. They make us extremely suffering. They're deeply painful. They're rooted in fear. All of them are rooted in fear. And they also happen to be misconceptions, liars. They lead us up garden paths. And these lies have been in our mind for so long, these disturbing emotions have been in our mind for so long, that they have literally created the universe as we exist in. And they make everything appear a certain way. So long, it's like you believe that pink is blue for so long that even now it appears blue to you. This is the depth of these mistakes. So just to start changing them overnight is not a possibility because we can't even see them. And in our culture, we don't even look at our mind. We don't think it's such. We know we experience pain in our mind. We know we experience suffering in our mind, there's no doubt, but we don't think the mind is the problem. We think everyone else is the problem. So that already is a massive stumbling block for us. So the very first level of practice, junior school, entry level, grade 1, where we start to hear that Buddha tells us that everything we think and do and say actually is the main player in our suffering and happiness, that we are the main player in our suffering and happiness. This is a stupendous concept. It is not in our culture. This is clearly stated in Buddha's teachings. That's what he's found to be true. So beginning to even buy into this view and then begin to try and harness your body and harness your speech and don't follow those berserk parts of your mind because they're the cause of your suffering, not the person out there. They only play a secondary role. This is like reversing the energy of a bomb. So to say that you can let me start working on my mind is like a joke. Why should I work on my mind? It's his fault and her fault and their fault. And Mr. Trump's fault, and the politician's fault, and the mother's fault, and the Catholic Church's fault, the whole universe's fault, everybody but mine. This is the kind of catch-22 of ego grasping. The root delusion is that we totally believe that to be true. So we don't even want to work on our mind, and even if we try, it's like a joke. We know that. So we've got to harness this. We've got to control the servants of the mind first. We've got to control the body and speech. But in our culture, we say, I can say what I like. I can do what I like. As long as no one catches us, we don't think it matters, you know. So in all these views we have are the stumbling block. They're all the things that prevent us from even wanting to work on our mind. And even if we do want to work on our mind, they're the stumbling blocks that prevent us from actually beginning to even see the mind. So there's got a lot of work to do first. Got masses of work to do first, you know. So that's junior school. Abide by the laws of karma. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Live in vows. Purify your mind. Can't get far without that. Then you get to high school, you're getting a bit closer to home now. We start to work at the mind. And here the crucial point is, we begin to understand the parts of our mind that cause us suffering. And there's thousands of these, but Buddha narrows them down to three. Ignorance, attachment, and aversion, the three poisons, the three toxic emotions. They sound so cute to us, but if we can begin to understand these by studying Lowri, by studying the texts on mind, then we'll begin to understand what Buddha's talking about. If we don't, we will never understand, and you will never in a trillion years be ready to practice Tantra. Don't even pretend. It's like a joke. So you have to understand the mind, the contents of our mind, Buddha's psychological model of the mind, which is so distinct. The words are the same as we understand, but the definition of these words, the way the mind functions, what it is, how it is, what its nature is, are profoundly and fundamentally different. So the crucial one we have to understand in high school, in the middle scope, after we've controlled our body and speech, we have to understand attachment. Lama Yeshe says, I can tell you about it for a whole year. You'll never begin to understand it until you start going deeply inside your mind, first based on understanding what it is. So what is it? Well, it's a thought. This is hilarious to us. But so why is it so physical? Because the body, the mind and the body, the tantric model of the mind and body is very helpful. The tantric mind, the model of the mind and the body is this intimate relationship, and we've got the subtle physical energy, the subtle channels coursing through our body. And then the wind energies, the prana, coursing through those channels, and all our states of mind connected to those wind energies. This is the Tibetan medical system. This is their model. And this is the same model in Vajrayana. We have to understand this. So help understand that, to help us here is helpful. So whatever our mind does pollutes the physical energy and causes us sickness and suffering. And our mind grows habits. So attachment, finally, the mind functions in two ways. Sensory consciousness and mental consciousness. Sensory consciousness are like dumb animals, but we give enormous power to our sensory consciousness. We conflate even sensory consciousness and what we think of as thoughts and feelings and emotions. But feelings and emotions have got nothing to do with the body. They're not the function of the body. They're expressed through the body because it impacts upon those wind energies, which impacts upon the grosser body. But love and compassion and attachment and anger and jealousy and pride are not physical in their character. But because they're connected to the subtle physical, they impact upon us physically, and we have physical feelings. So because we perfected attachment and perfected anger and perfected depression and perfected jealousy and anxiety and low self-esteem and all the other emotional dramas inside us, then we experience them. We only notice them in our culture. We only notice them when the body is shaking. That's why we talk about feelings, meaning we think they're physical. We think of anger as physical, jealousy as physical, anxiety is, and it feels like that. And the body is feeling something, but they are not depression. Depression is not physical. It is not those chemicals. It's triggered in the mind by the physical. This is a hugely important point to understand. It's not what we think. It's not what we believe. Unless you study Buddhist psychology, you would never know this. If you don't know this, then how can you control your mind? If you just think it's your body, it's a joke. But our tragedy is because we don't pay attention to our thoughts until they're vomiting out the mouth, until you're inert in bed with depression, until you're screaming in agony. We don't notice our mind until our body tells us something's going on. And that's like noticing your wheels are falling off at 120 kilometers an hour on the freeway, and you suddenly discover, oh, my wheels are falling off. Bit late, isn't it? A little bit late. But that's when we start to look at our mind and our culture. That's when we go to the therapist. Bit late. I'm sorry, just a bit late. So Buddha's view is incredible. We have to learn to start to see the mind beneath the physical to get to the level of the mental consciousness, which is the conceptual thoughts. Mental consciousness has two levels. We have sensory and mental. Sensory is like dumb animals. It's the tip of the iceberg. Eye consciousness cognizes shape and color. That's it. Tactile consciousness experiences, smooth and rough or whatever, very limited. Ear consciousness, cognizes mere sound. All the rest, divine Miles Davis, heavenly boyfriend, beautiful cup. These are mental states. These are conceptual stories. Quicker than Google, the millisecond your eyes see that shape and color, my mental consciousness is accessed, and that's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. And that's where all the stories and the memories and the viewpoints from countless lifetimes are stored. And up comes, oh wow, what a beautiful mug. What a lovely cup. What a lovely music. It's all mental thoughts. It's all, you see the boyfriend and you shake with bliss. Just with looking at his shape is enough to make you faint with pleasure. You think attachment's physical. No, it's not. It's a conceptual story that absurdly and grotesquely exaggerates that delicious shape. There's no deliciousness in that boyfriend. It's your mind making it up. So that's your mental consciousness. So the millisecond you see that shape and colour, due to the karma with that person and all the stories in your mind, in a millisecond quicker than Google, out come these stories. And then you believe that story is true, and then you believe the story is in him. So there's layers and layers and layers and layers of lies. We don't know how to attribute what part of our mind to which part of the mind. We've got no clue. We conflate pleasure and attachment. That alone is the most profound point that we have to understand. We'll never get anywhere with Buddhism, forget about Tantra, if we don't understand that pleasure and attachment are two separate states of mind. One is a neutral state of mind. Pleasure is not virtuous or non-virtuous. And delusion, attachment is virtue, is non-virtuous. You've just got to study the mind. If you don't study the mind, you're just walking in the dark, like a joke. This is in high school, in the sutra teachings. And you begin to harness your attachment. Why? Because it's the source. It's effectively the cause of all your suffering in daily life. Effectively, this is a realm of it created by attachment over eons of lifetimes. Attachment has created this body. It's like personal karma. It's like karmic evolution. Look at this body with 5 holes that demand feeding. Where's that come from? Attachment. Before this human planet, the human birth before this human planet, we had subtle light bodies that lasted like 1,000 years. We could get enlightened easily. There was no gross delusions. They were there latent, but there was no gross delusions. The body was subtle light because the delusions weren't there. They weren't gross. But gradually virtue got less and delusions grew, attachment grew, and it's like karmic evolution. You gradually grew penises and vaginas and eyes and ears and all the rest. And then we're born on a planet looking like a bunch of apes. Thanks a lot. In this realm of attachment, driven by attachment, created by attachment. Attachment drives every millisecond what we think and do and say. It's so much more subtle and more nuanced and more primordial than we could ever imagine. It's like a joke, Think you get some semblance of renunciation in this second scope in high school. You become this blissful, amazing, fulfilled, content, joyful person. More subdued, less neurotic, more fulfilled, more happy, and more wise, and more compassionate. And you look outside and you go, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. And now you start cultivating love and compassion and bodhichitta. Become this amazing being. Already now you can start to utilize your attachment even, You're not giving it up yet, but you can, in the beginning stages of practice, using the analogy, right, of, the chocolate cake. At the beginning stages of practice, because your attachment's so berserk, you just got to stop, just leave the cake on the plate, please, control your body and speech. By the time you get to the second scope and you start to understand attachment a bit, you can begin to have cake without going too berserk, because you understand it. You're no longer in the thrall of attachment, because you understand it and you've controlled it. You understand it. You're an amazing practitioner. You've got renunciation of suffering and its causes. And now you get to the bodhisattva path and you still haven't given up attachment, but honey, you can happily eat the cake for the sake of somebody else because your compassion way overrides your attachment. Now you get to the tantric path and you will directly relate. You're so sublime. You've got so much renunciation, so much understanding of emptiness, so much bodhicitta. You're this amazing being driven. The motor that drives you is compassion. The motor that drives the great tantric yogis is compassion. Why Lama Zopa Rinpoche never sleeps? Because he's got such compassion. He doesn't need to. He's a tantric yogi. These dudes are amazing. They don't need sleep or food or anything else because they've completely controlled their subtle physical and mental and gross physical energies. But what drives them to never give up, what drives them is compassion. This is hard to imagine. This is really hard to imagine. As Roger said one time, Lama Zopa's attendant, for Rinpoche, sleep is a disgusting waste of time. It's like how the way they always talk, all these bodhisattvas, and you sort of can't believe what they're saying, That it's like, your child or your mother, your child is dying and you better go, I better have my 8 hours of sleep while your child's dying. Bodhisattvas have this compassion, and this is what's hard to imagine, compassion for every living being. But you can't have that if you haven't done junior school and high school. Not a possibility, not a possibility, not a possibility. And that's what drives you. This is what drives you then to continue and then to eventually realize emptiness and then to enter Tantra. Then you just whiz to enlightenment super quick because you've got the whole damn universe under control. That's a summary of what we've talked about. So you've got to ask me some questions now. I'm sorry. You have to.
Venerable, I have a question. So these different schools like Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya, and Gelug, do they differ in their approaches to Tantra in some ways?
No, it's a very good point, Divya. Over the centuries, as we know in India, over the centuries, many just schools of thought developed. And one, and it's like you got your Lutherans and all the different Christian lot. The same with the Buddhists, and they try to stay harmonious. And you study these texts of all these different viewpoints about emptiness, and and then in Tibet it's the same. Over the centuries, they've developed into at least 4 different schools of thought, but many of those have their own sub-schools. And this is inevitable because people are different kinds of people. So they all have got different style, different approaches. In the end, they're all coming to the same thing. I think all the lamas would say that. So I think in the end, the ones we practice are those that we have the connection with. I mean, in my case, when I first thought about Buddhism, wasn't directly thinking about Buddhism. I'd been doing years and years of other things, looking for some kind of spiritual path eventually. And then I just saw this poster of Lama Yeshe. I hadn't thought of Buddhism, but I saw this poster, and for whatever reason, Lama Yeshe's name resonated, and I had the time to do it. So I did it, 1 month intensive course. And that's when I met Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe. And I only discovered later that they're called Gelugpa. I wouldn't have had a clue. I didn't even know the difference between Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism. I just fell into their lap. So it happens to be that that's the Buddhism that I have been practicing ever since, because it turned out to be where I belonged, my path, So it's up to each one of us. They all practice Tantra. They all practice all the same. They're all variations of the same. But in the end, the ones we practice, is what our connections are. We sort of go to the different ones and we connect with our teachers, and that's how we follow. Do you understand what I'm saying, Divya? It's like there's a million variations of yoga. So in the end, you start just doing yoga. You wouldn't know the difference. But as you go deeper, you begin to connect with a certain style. Same here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But for that, I need an exposure of all of these to be able to see which one I connect most with.
You need what, Divya? What did you say?
Exposure to all of the systems or all
not
of
necessarily,
the ways.
Not necessarily. Like I just said, I fell into the lap of the Gelugpas. It turned out for me personally, we're all different, Divya. You might need to do that, but I fell into the lap of these teachers, and I never doubt it became that way. Since that time, I've now got Sakya teachers, Kagyu teachers, and Nyingma teachers. But in my case, it was like that. Other people's case, they might go to a Gelug, then they go to a Kagyu, then they fall into the lap of a Sakya Lama. Each person is different, so we've got to take it one step at a time. I mean, here you are in this moment in time listening to a teaching of a Gelugpa tradition. So that's where you turned up right the second. You see, so I think once you start with something like you do with yoga, and then you follow it, you follow your heart. You don't go read all these theories about yoga before you go to the next class. You follow your heart. You study that one and you see where it takes you. And if you take it very organically and very sincerely, you will end up finding the right one for you. What do you think? Does that sound reasonable to you?
Yeah, it does.
So one step at a time, sweetheart. One step at a time. Here you are this second. I don't know what you've done before this, but you really try to listen carefully. You try to connect. You keep your heart open. You keep your mind open, and you always aspire. May I find the path that works for me? And you have this little kind of aspiration. And if you're really sincere and you practice properly every day, you will go in the right direction. That's my feeling.
Okay.
Just be patient and humble with yourself. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Yes.
Yeah, a really good point, Divya. A really good point. And people have teachers in all traditions, sweetheart. They really do. You can easily, I mean, I have, but I started with the Gelugpas, but that's my heart practice. They're my heart practices, and the others support it. You understand?
Venerable Robina, Jorge has a question. Do you need Tantra empowerment for tonight's class?
No, you certainly do not. You don't. Who asked that question?
Jorge.
No, Jorge, you do not. You do not, Jorge. This is very general teachings. I'm not giving anything like an empowerment, just general teachings about the philosophy and the psychology of Tantra. This is the last of our 6 classes, I think, so you're at the tail end of it, We've been trying to see it all in the framework of the whole path to enlightenment. But absolutely not, Jorge. What else?
David Lee has a question.
Good, David. Please go.
Thank you, Venerable Robina. Excuse me. It seems as if we have aversions to things that we consider negative. But when I look at it, I think I have an attachment to my aversions. For example, I have an aversion to living in a part of the country that has an unending, devastating drought. And I'm attached to that aversion. I have an aversion to living in a country where Republicans want to kill for their Messiah, Donald Trump.
I understand, yes.
I have that aversion.
I understand.
I don't want to leave it.
I understand.
I have an aversion to, what I have read, Tibetan nuns are thrown into a prison cell with 50 men because they won't denounce the Dalai Lama.
Uh-huh.
So we have these aversions, and it's a subjective thing. But it seems as if in Buddhism and Vedic traditions as well, you need to live in a bubble to avoid these kind of negative attachments.
No, I think that's a really good point, David. I think, like anything, when the beginning of practicing anything, you've got to be fairly focused and have other people doing it with you, because the outside influences are quite strong. But like anything, once you get really skillful at it, it's sort of like saying, well, the only way I can drive a car without having a panic attack is to drive on a road in the back roads with no other cars. Yeah, but at some point you've got to get onto the freeway. And when you're a really good driver, you can handle it. So the same when we really start to practice, David, and this is the junior school and high school level, when we start to see our mind and start to understand what that aversion is. And frankly, aversion is the response when our attachment doesn't get what it wants. The one that drives the aversion is this constant emotional hunger to get what I want every second. So this is what we have to learn to understand. So even to begin to understand that attachment, and then to realize that you might be right. The thing that let's say you have aversion to when you see people killing each other and you get angry, it's not as if when you give up aversion to the killing, that as if somehow you're wrong. Killing is still wrong. Maybe you're still right about the people, the bad things that happen, and you've got aversion to them. So the point is, we have to learn to give up the attachment and the aversion, and then we can see the reality that was always there, but through much clearer eyes, and we won't lose the plot. That's the whole job of that's the heart of being a Buddhist. And so first you've got to control your body and speech. If you vomit out of your mouth, I'm not saying you do, but if you vomit out of your mouth every day the angry thoughts that are in your mind, then you'll never be able to control your mind. That's why the junior school entry level, grade 1 level is harness the body and speech. Live in vows, control the body, control the speech. It's not just meant to be punitive, it's actually a method to help us not lose the plot. And by then you've got more control over your body and speech. Now you've got more control over your mind, and now we can get to the real job of being our own therapist, as Lama Yeshe puts it, and learning to work on the mind every damn day. This is the job, David. And then when you're really able to, we're able to be around other people, and it will not make us go crazy, David. This is the point. This is the whole point of practice. But we've got to know what we're capable of and what we're able to cope with. That's the skill we need to develop. You with me? Huh? No comment. What do you want to say, David? He's collapsed.
I'm sorry, I had to.
I know, I'm joking. So tell me what you think.
I'm with you, but it seems as if, there's some real horror that's taking place in the world right now.
There is. David, there is. Yes.
It's hard to just walk away and not have it trigger you.
But that's the point. This is what I'm trying to say. We are capable of that, David. We are capable. And if you think you're not, I think it's really good to think that you are capable. But this is where the Buddhist approach is. First, we have to control the body and speech. At least don't keep blurting out of our mouth every day. Then that already begins to harness it. It doesn't mean you live in a bubble. It doesn't mean you give up and don't care. It doesn't mean that what you're seeing isn't wrong. But this is the courage we've got to cultivate. And it's not that easy. But this is exactly what's possible. This is why, my friends, why I love to talk about my experience with working with people in prison, especially people who've been wrongly accused, who are completely innocent and have been put on death row, the most appalling experiences. The logic being in our thoughts that of course they're right to be going out of their brain with anger. How could they possibly work on their minds? But I'm telling you, the number of people I've got all over the world in our prison project who are in these nightmarish situations because they know that in prison they don't have the luxury to do anything. They can't walk away. They can't walk out of that cell, but they're using the Buddha's skills to transform their minds and not go berserk in the face of nightmares. This is the whole point that Buddha's making, David. This is the essence of all of Buddhist psychology. This is the point. In other words, we can, and the mind is more powerful. It certainly doesn't feel like it to us, but that's Buddha's expertise. It's not an easy job, but it's not just some cross your fingers and hope for the best job either. There's really detailed explanations of step by step of how to accomplish this job. And who is the beneficiary of this before you go any further? David is, because he stays steady and reasonable and he can see the world, and then he's able to have compassion and get out there and even more not lose the plot and actually help others. In other words, as Martin Luther King, I was always so moved by him. Look how hard he worked, never stopping in the face of these nightmares. And he said, it's good to be angry, meaning it's good to find fault. You've got to see, look at the racism, look at the sexism, look at the injustice, look at the insanity. But then you say, how can I help? That's compassion, David. But if we're overwhelmed by anger, that's what destroys us, and that's what helps us destroy each other. But we are capable of changing, and this is the point I'm getting at a bit. We've talked about it in the past, that attachment and anger and these conceptual stories, these emotions in us are deep in our bones, and they exist as highly developed conceptual stories. They are opinions, they are viewpoints. We've got to go deeper than the feelings, got to go deeper than the body to get to hear those conceptual stories and argue with them, because the Buddhist approach is they're not valid. Seeing injustice, that's valid. That never changes. So what changes, if just pretend David gives up anger and gives up aversion and becomes a radiant, joyful person, the suffering that you're seeing, David, won't suddenly not be there, but you will see it so differently. And you'll be capable of handling it and capable even helping others in it and not lose the plot. That's the point, David.
Well, as an example, I heard Zasep Rinpoche talk about, the nightmare of Tibet.
Yeah.
When he said, well, that's karma because 500 years ago, the Tibetans were awful people.
That's right.
Is that a Buddhist way of dealing with what's going on in Tibet these days?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, this is where, David, if we, when we start to really go deeply into the whole Buddhist view of the universe, which is such a big shocking one for our culture, who believe that our mother and father made us, or we believe a creator made us. Either way, neither view asserts a previous life of any kind, but karma's been around for several thousand years. I mean, these genius Hindu scholars and yogis were the ones who first observed it. Buddha came out of that tradition, and then he diverged in his own direction, in particular in relation to various things, particularly emptiness and other views. But I mean, karma's always been around in Asia. So, that's why I always use the example. I like to say Tibetans, for example, because for them, karma, in 2003, when I was running the prison project in San Francisco, and Richard Gere invited the Dalai Lama to New York. I always tell this story. And he wanted to have, when I was doing the prison project, so he was going to collaborate, but in the end he did his own thing, and he invited about 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of work in prison, like meditation or Buddhism or something, to meet the Dalai Lama. And they had a wonderful day. They were like a cross-section of Americans, black, white, Puerto Rican, some with incredible past suffering, some from death row, some from political activists, all this. And it was an amazing day. They all met His Holiness. It was a beautiful day. But he also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns. These young women, since they're little girls. And because for them, the view of karma, it's not just some hippy-trippy idea. It's deeply in the bones of their being that their entire culture takes as a given, and which they all study in depth in the monasteries, in exactly the same way, David, that we utterly take for granted in the modern world, Australia, America, the view that is running the universe now is the view of materialism, that our mind is the brain, that our mother made us, and that's the view that we just take for granted. We've learned it since we're little children. It's so ingrained in us, we don't even question it. So, of course, it's shocking for us to hear this view of karma, but for us, for the way we feel about materialism is what they feel about karma. It's just natural for them. The view that they are their mind goes back and back and back since beginningless time, that every living being's mind goes back and back and back. Their mind is not physical. They're not the handiwork of a creator. They're not the handiwork of their parents. Their parents give them a body, but their mind is their own. This is fundamental in all the Buddhist teachings, David. It's absolutely ingrained and implicit in the entire Buddhist worldview. So these nuns, for them, it's just natural. This is the way it is. They know they are that everything that ever happens to them, all their happiness and all their suffering, they're not just feeling like innocent victims, which is how we feel. We think it's all good luck or bad luck. We're always in a state of shock. We don't know why good things happen. We don't care why good things happen. We just greedily want more. But my God, look at the panic attack we have when we see bad things happen, David. So that because we don't have an explanation of it. They have a view. So this is shocking to us. They don't get angry. What is anger? Anger is, how dare that happen? How dare you do that to me? How dare those innocent people get hurt? Why? Who would say that as a person who doesn't have a view about why it happens? So of course there's so much anger in our culture because we don't have a view. It's very simple. It's very logical if we unpack our minds, which is the Buddhist approach. So these young women don't have that view. I mean, they would have been happily to get the hell out of that prison cell and not be sexually abused or tortured. But they had no choice. So they have this explanation of why things are happening that informs all of their practice. They became stronger and wiser and more compassionate beings. And then at some point they were released and they were telling their story and they were peaceful when they were telling it. And one of them was tears in her eyes. And then she said, and of course we had compassion for our torturers, because we know we must have harmed them in the past. And that's not just some emotional idea. That's the logic for them of that philosophical view, David. And of course, we also have compassion even more because we know that they will suffer in the future because of the suffering they've caused. So the view of karma is fundamental in Buddhism. But many Buddhists don't even like it and don't even think about it. But if we don't understand it, we don't have understanding of the whole entire Buddhist view. You don't have to believe it. No one's asking you to believe it, David. But this is fundamental to the entire Buddhist worldview from beginning to end. And it's been around for 5,000 years easily, this view of karma, So yes, the answer is to your question, yes, that's exactly the Buddhist approach. And I can say for myself, David, being growing up a good Catholic and then being a good communist and a good hippie and a good feminist with none of those views, then coming into Buddhism, stumbling into Buddhism, like I said, when I was like 31. And I know for me, as soon as I heard about karma, that for me I felt was huge. And that's been one of the major ones for me, for my own transformation, my own mind, letting go of ego and self-pity and blame and not fair and poor me and anger and resentment. The view of karma is a huge one. And I can say with certainty, buying into that view, not just believing it and swallowing it whole, but taking it as my working hypothesis has been it is every day a major basis for my ability to put this stuff into practice. It's huge.
Yeah, but I have a problem with collective karma because, the whole planet is suffering from global warming.
That's right.
So what your whole planet have done,
yes.
Even animals, what could we have done? We were all suffering the collective karma of the planet dying.
Exactly, but we can see, can't we? We can see that some of us have personal experiences of happiness, like one person might win the lottery, or we have personal experiences of suffering. One person will eat a peanut and they'll die. But we can also see we're very social beings, and we not only do we do things together, David, and so we experience the results together. I mean, the Tibetans have that very comfortable. The Chinese, as a group of people, have a very strong karmic connection with the group of people called Tibetan people. We do things in groups, David. And the karmic law is a natural law. No one's up there punishing and rewarding. It's not random. It's not kind of good luck and bad luck. It's not punishment, not reward. There's no punisher and there's no rewarder. For the Buddha, it is a natural law that runs the universe. So whatever, we all do things together, so we experience the result together. It's a natural law. If you throw a bunch of seeds in one ground, that's where the weeds will, grow 50 years later. But I mean, it takes time to think about it, David, because you can't just hear one aspect of it. It's an entire worldview that's quite intricate and dealt with in great depth and breadth in the Buddhist literature. So if we're interested, we need to study it to try and join all the dots, And the other thing, David, that's so fascinating, you see, we never ask the question why good things happen, because we're always addicted to bad things. That's the irony of ego, and you're just pointing it out, because we're all the same as you. We're always addicted to the bad things. We only ask why bad things happen. I mean, if good things happen, we don't even ask why. Just give me more, please. But the millisecond one bad thing comes along, and David's got aversion to one thing, he has a panic attack. I mean, honey, you're like the rest of us, nothing special. You're just sticking your neck up, that's all. This is how we all are. It's the irony of ego. We're addicted to the misery. We run to the negative. It's kind of fascinating. But we take the good for granted. But it's a bit like, I like the nice analogy there. The Lamas always talk about the karma as seeds and fruits, because everything we say and do and think will sow seeds that will bring our future fruits. So your life is your garden. So you don't kind of look in your garden and just take the fruits and veggies for granted, but have a panic attack when you see the weeds. They're all your garden, baby. And you take responsibility for the weeds as well as the flowers. When we can start with karma to really take responsibility for the good things that happen, it shifts the whole view, Because every second of your life, David, you think about it, so many good things. You've got good people, you've got a home, you've got enough money, you've got a bit of money in the bank, you've got a sanity, you've got clarity, you've got many good things happen. We never ask why do they happen. It's only when the bad ones happen we have a panic attack, And why? Because the junkie in us called attachment only wants the good things, and we greedily eat them up and just demand more, and then have a panic attack when we don't get it, because that's what aversion is. Anyway, how come you know Zazep Tulku? He's one of my lamas as well. I knew him back in the 70s.
The internet, even though he's from Canada.
Oh, I see. Okay, you're Canada. No, I met him in the 70s in Australia.
Oh no, I mean I'm in New Mexico, but
oh, okay.
I know.
Oh, okay. So I met him. He was at Chen Raising Institute. He was at Lama Zopa's Lama Yeshe Center in the 70s. I remember meeting him then. He was one of my teachers. Yeah. Good, David. Thank you for your questions, honey. Keep moving. Go, Mary.
Venerable Robina, Sarah has a question, and then there's 3 questions in the chat.
Good, Sarah. Talk to me, sweetheart.
Hello.
Hello, darling.
Thank you so much.
Good,
thank you for your teachings.
Good.
My dogs are starting to bark. Can you repeat the depression part that you said earlier about it being different?
I understand that. It's interesting analysis, Sarah. Okay. So this Buddhist model of the mind, right? By the way, everybody, if you haven't been to other classes, this is not Tantra. This is Sutra. We're back in high school. Tantra is postgraduate, but that's okay. Nothing wrong with going to high school again. So the thing is, the Buddha's saying, well, the key thing is first, the Buddhist psychological model divides all the different hundreds and thousands of states of mind, feelings, emotions, all this stuff in us, all this big super emotion inside us, right, into three essential categories. One lot are the negative, neurotic, disturbing, distressing, delusional states of mind that absolutely make us miserable and then make us harm other people. You understand? And then you've got the positive ones: love, compassion, spaciousness, kindness, generosity, forgiveness, confidence, all these words. We get these. We really get these words. So the Buddhist analysis of these is quite distinct and quite unique to the Buddha. Because when we hear negative and positive, it makes it sound a bit fundamentalist, but it's not, or punitive, but it's not like that. The negative ones, the unhappy ones, the Buddha says they're the source of our pain. So there's thousands of those, thousands. And the word they use in Buddhist literature is the word affliction. Well, there's many synonyms we can use in the more modern ones, like they're mental problems. I mean, they're called anger's a mental problem, and you can't argue with it. I mean, we just call it, it's natural, but it's a mental illness if you think about it. A person who shouts and yells and has a panic attack when things go wrong. I mean, join the universe here. So then, all these different ones, there's thousands of them, but the Buddha, there's a very clear map of the mind, actually, and all of these subsume to 3. And they're called the 3 poisons. I mean, we read this and it just sounds so cute to us in the West. We don't take it seriously. But these 3, the 3 toxic emotions, the 3 poisons, and there's a hierarchical relationship between them. The root one, they call it the root affliction, the root delusion, the root mental problem. It's simply called ignorance, and that's the deepest one. And its function, this is really primordial, and this is not dealt with until later in the path. But this one is the deepest, most primordial neurotic emotion that's rooted in fear, and it clings mightily to a really distorted, unhappy, limited, concrete sense of me, right? That's it, the root one, and that informs everything. But it's so subtle, we don't see it expressing itself. It expresses itself only through the others. But only when you have a panic attack and you're nearly screaming, or someone's abused you and nearly had a car accident. That's when it kind of is like a sleeping lion. That's when it wakes up, and it's like terror and fear. Most of the time it's asleep. Now, its main voice is this emotional hunger, attachment to get what that poor, bereft, unhappy, neurotic fantasy self wants. So they're all liars, basically. They're very emotional, they're very disturbing, but they're all rooted in being, in our bones, they're rooted in being misconceptions. They're not valid assessments of reality. So attachment is this emotional, it's multifaceted, this emotional hunger. So using David as an example, and he's like the rest of us, he talks about having aversion to things. Well, the third one is aversion. So aversion, which is the polite word for anger, it's got multifaceted as well, but I'll go into both of them in a minute. But when attachment is junkiness, this emotional hunger, that basically the simplest way to put attachment, and it's pretty subtle, is this constant, it's like at the level of assumption, this constant assumption that I must get what I want every second. Now, David is an example. He's like the rest of us. He has a view that is a different set of political views. He's got a different view about the world. He might be right or he might be wrong, but that's not the issue here. He's got his own view, just like the rest of us. So as soon as David sees views or hears about views that don't suit his attachment, and he also might be right about it, then aversion arises, like he just said. He's just like the rest of us. So now, attachment's multifaceted. It's deep. First of all, it's deep. The deepest level of it, and this is from practicing in past lives, it's called dissatisfaction. This sounds so peculiar. This is really, we have such levels of it, we call it self-hate. Dissatisfaction means I don't have enough, I'm not, and it's not enough, and the food's not enough, but the deepest level of this dissatisfaction is that I'm not enough. And that's what we call self-hate. And as Amos Ober says, that's the worst suffering in the West. We have the deepest level of attachment, this constant dissatisfaction, it's constantly there. It's an assumption. I am no good. I am not enough. I am too fat. I am too thin. I am no good. But it's a function of attachment. Constantly. So then, because you're never enough and never have enough and never get enough and never am enough, then you hanker after something, which is the next level of attachment, this hankering, this hunger. So where does that dump itself first? Onto the 5 sense objects. It's pretty obvious. But not just that. It also then really dumps itself onto having nice things and people loving us and praise and blah, blah, blah. It never stops. It's always there. And its assumption is at the level of assumption. And 1,000 times a day, that attachment won't get what it wants. And what will arise the second it doesn't get what it wants? That's the arising of aversion. Now, David's expressing it in a particular way. He's not telling us he goes out and kills and rapes and murders people when he gets angry, but he probably just feels it. He might say words, and that's common for us. But there are some people, possibly you, who don't express it in that way. And so, because there's a whole spectrum of aversion. So aversion is thwarted attachment. It works at quite a subtle level, and it's 1,000 times a day. Now, it's got a whole spectrum. The obvious volatile level, which has been my style in my life, is simply called anger. You shout and yell and scream. But there are milder versions of it, and you're probably like that, Sarah. You probably say you get annoyed sometimes, you get frustrated, you get irritated. They're common words, aren't they? They are mild levels of anger. They're thwarted attachment, Sarah. And because the Buddhist view about the mind is that nothing ever goes astray, every single thing you think, anything you think, it stays in the mind. You're building up the habits. And then eventually the other end of the spectrum of this aversion, it builds up and builds up and builds up, and it becomes deep depression. And one day you can't get out of bed.
Yeah.
All of these are a build-up, because we don't deal with our mind second by second, we just build it all up. So we build up, and then we deny things because bad things happen because we can't cope, so we push it away. We have all these memories tucked away, and we don't cope with what's in front of us. We haven't coped with what's come before us, and one day we have a mental breakdown. We just can't handle it because we're not dealing with our mind. So this is Buddha's skill. It's got to take time, honey. Don't hold your breath. We have to learn to unpack and unravel all these conceptual stories, and then start with eventually, when we're really skillful, to deal with which one arises each minute, and you handle it. If you deal with the moment now and handle it, you'll never get PTSD and all these things we talk about. We've all got PTSD because we've all denied our past experiences and can't handle them and lock them away, and wonder, we have panic attacks because we don't deal with our minds. That's Buddha's expertise. It's a pretty intense job, I tell you, honey.
Yeah, thank you. Venerable Robina, do you have any literature that you can suggest that goes into more depth on the specific subject of aversions and attachments? And is there a text that's...
No, I don't. They don't go into it in too much depth. They just talk about it in a very...
Okay.
And it's up to us to put the meat on the bones. I mean, I talk about it a lot. So you've got to get, transcripts of different teachings or the teachers you like who go into it. A lot of the modern teachers talk a lot about this because this is a level we work at,
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you,
darling. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank
Who
you.
else, sweetheart? Who else, Mary?
Venerable Robina, this is a question from MP, and MP would like for me to read it. What is the future of Buddhism without the attachment of tradition? Does it make it more Pythagorean?
What's that word mean? Hypergorean. How do you spell it?
Pythagorean.
What does that mean? You have to translate that Greek word. I don't know what it means. Whoever said that question, can you tell me what it means, please?
MP, would you like to share that? Oh, she said it's about, MP put it in the chat, it's about Buddhism becoming science.
Science. Science. I'm asking you, Mary, did she say science?
Yes, she said science.
Okay, good. Science. I can't hear you so well, Mary. Your voice gets blurred.
Science.
Okay. So, first of all, we've got cultures, right? We've got all these cultures around the world, aren't they? And as soon as you get some human beings together, or monkeys for that sake, or ants, we develop our style of behavior, don't we? So, I mean, look at all the different cultures. Look at the different human beings. So then often what happens is when we look into religion, we look at the external. So Australians might go to a Japanese Zen monastery and get all blissed out about Zen behavior and start acting like Japanese people, confusing the behavior with the teachings. That's the biggest mistake. That's the commonest mistake among Tibetans, Western people who get into Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, Tibet was stuck away behind the mountains for centuries, and it has got its own completely distinct style, completely unique to itself, isolated for so many hundreds of years. So, of course, it's developed its own way of presenting all these teachings. I mean, they came from Tibet. They came from India before that, and now they're in the West. So it seems to me, you've got to strip away the culture without chucking the baby out with the bathwater. It's pretty obvious. And often people in the West try to do that. Oh, we don't like that. We don't like Sangha. So they end up just, not really knowing it properly. You've got to go into the depth of the teachings, it seems to me, and not be so arrogant, any of us, and just keep, keep like our teachers, we all know, 50 years later, they're still looking like Tibetans. I look like a Tibetan, for God's sake. Look at me with my Tibetan style. And that's okay. I'm in no hurry. But we listen to the teachings. You've got to listen from the source. So the source we have got is called Tibetan. I can't expect them to think differently. That's very rude of me. They're Tibetan. It's up to me to learn to know what the hell they're talking about, so I can then translate it into our language. Now, some people like Lama Yeshe did that from day one. He was incredibly compassionate, incredibly wise. He was able to immediately talk to modern Western hippies in a way that totally suited our minds. He was extraordinarily skillful in that way. And the only person who can do that is a person who's truly internalized and understands the actual essence of those words. So he was a Tibetan person, but he wasn't telling us about Tibetan. He was telling us about the actual teachings. And that's something I found from the very beginning when I first heard the teachings. And I realized that if I couldn't find universal truths in this Tibetan packaging, then clearly it wasn't for me. In other words, when I first went to my first teaching, the monks sat in front of the nuns and it was very typically patriarchal, and Tibet's very patriarchal, this blah, blah, blah. And I've been a radical feminist. And I thought to myself, if I discover from listening to these teachings that they're intrinsically patriarchal, if in their bones they are that, then of course it's schizophrenic for me to be a bloody Buddhist, ridiculous. So what I found from listening to the teachings, unpacking and having to unpack to try to get to the essence to the best I could in my first 2 months of teachings, then the one for me that was really compelling was that what Buddha's finally talking about is consciousness. That's not even human. It's not dog or animal. All they are karmic shapes. And each of us, due to past lives and past karma, we create these karmic experiences, which is simply what culture is. Whether you label it Australian or Iranian or whatever it might be, it's just a packaging on top of the essence. Now, there's nothing wrong with packaging. Behavior, how you behave and how you speak and how you act, this also has great meaning. Don't chuck it out. But we have to learn to first understand the Tibetan one and then learn to find the way to make it real and integrated and coherent for a different culture. And here I am, and I'm Australian, an American as well, and English actually, all these things, but whatever, trying to find a way from the bit of experience I've got from hearing my teachers in a way that we talk, so it makes it real for us. But it's got to be authentic, you can't just make it up, So then everything will evolve. It will evolve naturally. But the important thing is not to chuck the baby out with the bathwater. Some things are cultural, yes, but in the end, this is the interesting point. And the Dalai Lama always talks this way, if there's any, and they say this in the teachings, is that there's a wonderful poetic Lamrim text by Tsongkhapa called Hymns of Experience, Songs of Experience. And, he wrote it in the 14th century, but it's just as valid now. And he said, everything in the teachings is to be taken as sound advice, because there is no contradiction between scripture, the words, and practice. Now, whatever there is in Tibetan Buddhism, down to whether you offer a mandala, whether you do a prostration, the way I wear my zen with my bare arm, the way I walk, the way I hold my mala, if there's anything in those things that I do that don't finally help me do the job of lessening delusions and growing my virtue and my wisdom, which is becoming a Buddha, then it's clearly a load of superstition. Chuck it out, chuck it in the bin and give it right back to Buddha. But if I can see the logic of it, the meaning of it, even though it's Tibetan, then why not adopt it? We're adopting new languages all the time. People learn French, they become like French people. There's nothing wrong with that. People, you learn art, so you learn that art. You can learn languages. It's just a language. So we can see the meaning behind the behavior, behind the packaging, and you decide to adopt it. What's wrong with that? But just to do it superficially, or to do it because you think the culture is the thoughts, that's a big mistake. Or to chuck out all the behavior and you chuck the baby out with the bathwater, that's the other extreme. So I hope that's just my thoughts, Pierre. Does that make sense, sweetheart? Okay, who else?
Next question is from Aida. Venerable Robina, could you talk about the emptiness of the mind? His Holiness last night indicated that we should be meditating on the emptiness of our own mind.
That's right.
Thank you.
That's Mahamudra. So Ida, get Lama Yeshe's book called Mahamudra, How to Discover our True Nature. That's exactly the method. That's the perfect method, coming back from the 17th century Panchen Lama and going back before that when the teachings were kept secret. So this is Lama's beautiful book. He taught it in Australia in 1982 or something, and it's called Mahamudra, and it's literally using the two modes of meditation, concentration, and the second one called insight. And the crucial point is there that and His Holiness has got a beautiful book on this. He taught it actually soon after the Lama gave this teaching in 82. He also requested Lama, when he invited His Holiness, Lama invited all his Western students to go to India for a big Dharma celebration, and he requested His Holiness to give a commentary on the same text by the Panchen Lama. So His Holiness gave this amazing teaching, touching on all the different traditions like Dzogchen and Mahamudra and all the different Tibetan traditions, bringing them all together and showing how they're coherent, and they're all about, they're variations of how to meditate on the nature of the mind. So it's Mahamudra then, it's just this term, Great Seal, that someone created back when, I don't know, maybe Panchen Lama, Sanskrit. But what it's referring to emptiness, this ultimate way that things exist. But it's a particular way of meditating on it, and it's a particular object of meditation. So often we know when you do there's two modes of meditation. Concentration, which is known as shamatha. Calm abiding, it's called, which is the name given to the end result of the accomplishment of this single-pointed concentration, this brilliant technique that the Indians invented, well before the Buddha. Then the second mode of meditation is insight, vipassana. And Lord Buddha taught many types of insight meditations. Often one he would use would be, in order to get insight into impermanence, he would get us to use concentration to watch the sensations of our body. The insight he's wanting us to get is not into the body, that's clear. It's that everything changes. So there's many insight techniques that he taught. Here, the most advanced one is insight into emptiness, insight into the ultimate nature of things. So the thing here, he wants us in this technique is to get insight into the emptiness of your mind. So the first mode of meditation, the concentration, normally we might meditate on the breath or meditate on a visualization. But here in Mahamudra, the very unique thing that you concentrate on is your own mind itself. And Lama talks about this in depth. It's so helpful, Ida. You'll really enjoy it. So the first thing you concentrate on, they call it the conventional nature of your mind, which is the clarity of your mind, which is really not meaning you're very clear in your thinking, meaning the mind that's more steady, So you focus, you begin by just simply concentrating on whatever pops up in your mind. And Lama talks about it very clearly. And Tsongkhapa talks about, they all, in the Gelugpas and the other traditions, there's a Kakagyu's tradition as well, they talk, Tsongkhapa talks about how there's something very special about the mind, because it's not physical, because it's not something concrete, and it's right there. And once we start to concentrate on it, there's something very powerful about the experience of the mind that can help us very quickly get a taste for the emptiness of the mind. So the second mode of meditation is where you then start to try to understand the emptiness of your mind. But the first one, you see, the first thing to do though, because this is more advanced, the first one, and Lama mostly taught this, when he taught this in 82, it was the first time in Australia there was a highest yoga tantra empowerment. He gave Haruka Chakra Samvara, because the tradition is you only give Mahamudra properly in the framework of giving a highest yoga tantra initiation. The teachings itself are the sutra part, and the end part is the tantric part. But it was the first time it was given in Australia, so most of the people had no clue about emptiness of the mind or anything else. So Lama mostly just talked about emptiness of the self, which is what you first have to realize. Then you can realize the emptiness of your mind. So I recommend that you read Mahamudra, sweetheart. And it'd be wonderful if in the classes we could, Mary, I'm sure we're going to organize this, aren't we, Mary Morgenberg? We're going to organize it, aren't we, that we use Mahamudra as the basis for some teachings, aren't we? Mary.
That would be wonderful. Thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So, all right, next question, please.
Next question is from Jorge. He has two questions. This is the first one. So the more good personal karma we create, the more good collective karma we create.
Doesn't follow, Jorge. Collective karma, I mean, look at it, if 10 people do something together, have got a very close connection, 10 people, then karmic, even in this life you'll have a close bond. So then you're going to meet again in a future life, 27 lives later, who knows when, where you will experience the results of it. Let's say you 10 people, let's say you won the lottery, and then you were very generous. Well, you're going to guarantee it as a group later, because each of you creates those causes, but you happen also to do it as a group, including the negative karma. So you look at the millions of Tibetans who all suffered at the hands of the Chinese communists, or you look at the millions of Jews who have suffered at the hands of the Nazis, or you look at the millions of Nazis who harmed the Jews and the other way around. These just big groups of people having look at countries when endlessly harming each other. So your next 57 lives later, the ball is in the other court, or the something's in the other hand, whatever they say. We do everything, but collectively, the collective results is from doing things collectively. But if you sit there in your little cave and get all these realizations and do things on your own, you'll only experience the results on your own. Of course you will. Collective is if you do things together. And we're very social beings. We do everything together. Look at football teams and races. And everybody does things as groups, or identifies with a certain group. So we're always going to collectively experience the results of those. So if you're a part of a group that's very arrogant, I always joke now about, we've discovered now in the news, we've now finally discovered in America and the whole world, there's a new group we've just discovered who are quite problematic, and that group is called white men. But until now, white men have always been the default mode of the universe, haven't they? And all the other people of the groups, women of the group, and Asians of the group, and blacks of the group, and all the other groups. But the default view is white men. So now finally, we're all turning around and there's a group called white men, and we're looking like they're the problem. Dave, it's okay. It's the other white men we're talking about. I'm just joking. I am not joking, but I'm joking. So we all do things as groups. So if you're part of the top dogs in culture, if you're a white man and you've got this arrogance about it, and we're all arrogant, we all want to be in the top group, there's a hubris there, isn't there? So guaranteed one day, guess who you're going to get born as? A bunch of girls, I'm sorry. Or a bunch of black people or something. We get shat upon. I'm not being sarcastic. We all create this. It's not punishment. It's not reward. It's not some superstitious view. But we're so shocked by it because we don't think like this. Our view in the West is something different. It's very interesting. So anyway, it was a long answer to your question, Jorge.
I have a follow-up question on this, Venerable. Basically,
Yes.
so when we have a motivation of bodhichitta, we imagine all sentient beings with us, and we sort of meditating or whatever we're doing on behalf of all of the sentient beings. So
Yes.
isn't like I'm creating karma on their behalf as well?
Well, no, I
Well,
don't
how-
think it's... No, Divya, it's a very interesting point, Divya. I mean, you can't be, because in the end, it's a bit like, listen to me, Divya, it's like this. Let's just say instead of wanting to become a Buddha, get bodhichitta and become a Buddha, you want to become the best tennis player so you can help everybody on the planet play tennis. So obviously as part of your positive thinking regime every day to motivate you to go and learn tennis every day, you imagine you're helping every single tennis player every time you do your tennis. Are you getting my analogy here? So far, Divya, are you hearing my point so far?
Yes.
But those
so far,
people aren't
yes.
doing anything. All that's doing is giving you the inspiration and the energy to have compassion for all these people. So you're thinking every day, doing it for all sentient beings. You're the beneficiary of that, darling. But they will eventually be the beneficiary because you'll go out and help them play tennis. But they're not doing it with you. Of course they're not. They've got to be actively involved. They've got to have them, to create karma, you have to have your mind involved, Divya. Your mind creates karma. But you, by having bodhicitta, you imagining taking on the suffering of others, that's the work you do to become the best Buddha. And then you're able to help all those trillions of sentient beings. And when you meet them one-on-one, you make a karmic connection, that's for sure. What do you think? Do you understand?
Yes,
Good,
I do
good,
understand.
darling.
Thank you.
Who else? Okay, so then any other questions, people?
Yeah, hi, Robina.
Yes.
Catherine.
Catherine, sweetheart, talk to me.
So lately I've been feeling kind of defeated that, like, this path and then just like kind of basically everything in my life, I can get to a certain point, but I don't, like, it just seems getting further. Like Tantra is just like, it's huge, or like, enlightenment is like, it just seems unrealistic and like really, can I really, is it really possible?
I understand.
I'm just feeling so limited lately that,
I understand, darling.
like.
Well, it's really not uncommon. It's not uncommon, Catherine, because what we're talking about is so vast, and it's natural we're going to be this way. But I mean, we've got to look at but all we can do is try and find the logical reasons, step by step, to argue with those views. And this is where we've got to be try to be very rational. And we have to be this. And you've got a super intelligent mind, but we know you've got all the tools. So we see there's just so many approaches to it. I mean, one I think that we totally forget, Catherine. I think because of our attachment, we're so addicted to wanting it to be nice now. So I use these dumb analogies, but I have to use these analogies because for me they're so logical, I can't argue with them. They help my mind enormously. It's just, we all know if you've got a vision of something and like a building or a garden, we've got the logic, we understand architecture, we understand engineering, we understand building, we understand botany, we know those laws are there. So even though it's only a 10-year plan, not a 10-life plan, I understand the point. But still, if you didn't know botany, Catherine, after 1 week you would give up on your garden because you don't see the results. So if you understand botany and you then see it, even the garden looks worse than it did last week because you started to pull it all up and pull out all the weeds and it's covered in dirt and you can see nothing. It looks terrible. But if you've got a plan, if you understand botany and you know exactly what you're doing, then you're going to have a completely different view of it. So if you forget the path and you forget what you're doing, and you start to identify because things don't look good now and you buy into those stories, you'll give up, honey. Of course you will. And that's why we've got to be very, not ruthless, but clear and logical with ourselves. And surely is that not true too? That's where the function of the teacher comes in. If you know someone else who's got one decent garden, if you've never seen a decent garden in your life, you're forgiven. You can be forgiven for giving it up. But if you know other people have done it, and if you know it's possible, then you pick yourself up and you just keep going one step at a time. And sometimes just tell yourself to shut up and just keep moving, because you've got the path. I mean, I know you've got the path, you've got devotion, you've got faith, you're doing the practices. I mean, it's all I can say. All we can do is do this. Everyone, we've got to be our own give ourselves little pep talks every day. This is what enthusiasm is. It's the hardest one, darling. It's normal what you're saying. It really is it's tough. But then we've got to learn also. But the other one is, and I guarantee you don't do this, you don't rejoice enough in your good qualities. You see the garden as a big mess, but you've got to rejoice. You've got a path, you've got the botany, you know what you're doing, you've got the seeds, you are doing it, you're pulling out all the weeds, and the weeds are very dominant right now. The dirt is coming out, but you have to praise yourself and know you're doing a great job. I bet most of us never do that, Catherine. These are the methods. I mean, I know exactly, this is exactly what I try to do every day. Every single day I try to do this. And then I remember Lama Zopa. I remember the Dalai Lama. I don't put him on a pedestal. Oh, there's just the Dalai Lama. I say to myself, if he can do it, I can too. These are the methods, honey. These are the methods. There's no other secret method. What do you think?
I mean, I definitely, like, if I look back, realistically, like 20 years ago or whenever I started this, which was like, I don't know, 25 years ago or something, yes, I definitely see progress. I see change, and for the better, and
that's right.
And I'm much happier. I mean, I'm glad I'm where I am now than where I was.
There you go, darling. That's right.
But I still feel like it seems so monumental, like,
but it is.
Like the
but it
task is just like,
but
it's so huge, it's overwhelming.
But it is monumental. But it is, you're right. But you're right. But what else is there but one step at a time? I mean, it is right. But if you've got a map, okay, another analogy I like to use, if you've got to walk from here to Sydney, probably take you 6 months, a year maybe. That's monumental, baby. And look at the obstacles on the way. But imagine that you didn't have a map, Catherine. Then you could even have a mile journey and not have a map, and you'll get utterly confused and lost. But if you have a 20,000 mile journey, but you have a map, that for me is a very powerful analogy. Then you just put one foot in front of the other, baby. I find that incredibly powerful. It's very strong in Western psychology as well, just one foot in front of the other. And if you don't have a map, Catherine, if you don't have a plan for that garden, you can be forgiven for being depressed. But if you have a map, sweetheart, you've got to have confidence in that map. That's what keeps me persevering. I have confidence in the map. So all I can do is take one step at a time. I love the saying, I've got to pave the way. Don't get so caught up in the 27,000 miles you got left to do. Look up the 10 miles you've done. I know this is just, you've got to trick your mind, honey. This is all it is, And just take one step at a time, delight in your progress, cheer yourself on, go to bed with a happy mind, get up next morning and just keep moving. I swear to you, this is so simple, but it's beyond profound. Because I don't think there is a choice, Catherine.
Yeah, because the choice is just to go back to like how I was before, although
can't.
I don't know
if
I can even do that.
But that's not a possibility. You can't go backwards. It's not possible. You can't stand still and you can't go back. That's an impossibility. You've got no choice but to move forward. You could take a wrong turn off and then get lost. But just stick to your map, babe. Just stick to the map. And then try to rejoice. You see, if you don't, the Lamas tell us this, but it sounds so corny to us. It sounds like being Pollyanna. But we are addicted to the misery. You're constantly pointing out where you haven't got to. You're constantly pointing out what you haven't achieved. We all do that. That's the irony of ego, darling. We've got to point out what we have achieved. And yes, it's 27,000 miles to go. It's true. You're right. It is monumental, but it's logical and doable. That's why studying sometimes, or studying the nature of mind, or studying emptiness can be very powerful, because it's logical. It's logical, therefore doable. It's not cross your fingers and hope for the best. What do you think, Catherine Petal? Huh?
Yeah, I mean, what else is there to do?
That's
So,
it,
yeah.
darling girl. That's the one. But try and remember the good things. I swear to you. Thank you, Catherine. You're speaking for all of us, darling. Don't worry about it.
Venerable Robina, I have a question.
Yes.
From John Landau's about the Tantra.
Good. Ask me.
He was talking about Tantra's use of the energy underlining desire to propel us swiftly along the path. Can you talk more about that?
Well, actually, when I was editing Lama Yeshe's book, The Bliss of Inner Fire, we had various questions, and I was asking Kirti Senchab Rinpoche. And the traditional way they talk in the tantric teachings is, as we've been talking even tonight, that the yogis can use the delusions, they can use attachment. But actually, as Kirti Senchab Rinpoche said, you don't use attachment, you use the bliss that is generated by contact with attachment objects. So finally, at the end result for the greatest yogis, it's a technical point. It's technical. Let's talk about it in an ordinary day-to-day way, which we've done in the last few weeks. But it's finally a technical point. That contact, the very way we're constructed, this, like I mentioned before, we are the result of attachment. This is a desire realm. No one made it. We made ourselves and we created this universe from eons of attachment. So we're born in a body of attachment. So these great yogis, before the Buddha, the great Indian yogis first discovered all this, and then the Buddhists, there's something about the way we're constructed, the very physical way we're constructed, the way, the capability of the body because of the white and red kundalini, the way we can have bliss. And so they understand very intimately the construction of this subtle physical body and mind. So the greatest yogis have given up, have got renunciation, have realized emptiness and got bodhichitta. They're the ones who are super capable of utilizing in general the delusions without going berserk, as Lama Yeshe puts it, but in particular they found technically, as Lama Yeshe says, Tantra is highly technical, that the greatest yogis have found that there's something about the level of bliss that the mind is capable of experiencing, that when it's super special bliss, when combined with concentration, gets the mind to the very subtle level, to the clear light mind. And that's the microscope of the mind. That's the level of mind we want to get to, because that level of mind is the one with which we can become enlightened. So that's literally the literal answer. Does that make sense?
So the bliss of our seeing chocolate cake.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about the final
That
yoga.
would,
No,
that's
darling.
still
I'm
delusion,
talking.
right?
I'm talking.
We're talking about something
No,
different.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the greatest, finally, the actual accomplished yogis.
Okay.
So now let's talk about what this means and how we can apply this tantric approach to daily life. And that's why I really encourage you to read John Landau's course notes, but also more in particular to read Lama Yeshe's Introduction to Tantra, because this is the way Lama Yeshe taught from day one, meeting Western people. He was able to translate it so beautifully into ordinary psychological terms. So now let's talk about this. The way we can utilize, the way we can understand this tantric approach and apply it in our daily lives. And this is really talking to Catherine now. It's exactly another approach, Catherine, is this is the tantric one is, as Lama Yeshe says, when we're miserable, when we're full of delusions, when we're angry and depressed and angry and unhappy and attached and all the things that we know about, we know those thoughts loom large in our mind. We know this. This is why we're always miserable. He says, you people don't know how to be happy. You know how to be miserable. So when you've learned from junior school to control your body and speech, and then you learn to control your mind and get some renunciation, already what kind of person do you think you'd be? You'd be less neurotic, less attached, less depressed, literally more content, literally more joyful, even with renunciation. Because you've harnessed the crazy energy and you're not listening to all the crazy voices. You're not buying into the constant negativity, never stopping. You've transformed your mind already. You've subdued attachment. You've subdued anger. You're becoming, therefore, more joyful, more fulfilled, more content. Then you add bodhichitta to the mix. And by the time you get to Tantra, then it is literally now, because virtue and goodness and joy are predominant, You can, this is in daily life we're talking. Then by becoming, you get this incredible, so then you take a tantric empowerment where you vow to see yourself as the deity, as blissful, fully enlightened Tara. You vow to hear all sound as Tara's mantra. You vow to see the entire universe as the pure land of Tara and all beings as Tara. So in Tantra, you're consciously taking all the hard work you've done of renunciation, bodhichitta, and emptiness and actively, consciously energizing bliss and joy, and therefore love and compassion and the virtues, because they are linked to bliss and joy. And so you become this marvelous, uplifted, glorious, joyful, happy person. That's Tantra. Are we communicating?
Yes, thank you.
It's
It's a good thing to look forward to.
That's right. So
Yeah.
the highest level of it, that's because the greatest yogis, but let's go one step at a time. And that means we've got to actively buy into our virtuous thoughts, actively rejoice in what we're doing, actively say I'm doing a good job, think about how I am satisfied and I am a good person, and I am doing well, and I have done so much work, and my qualities are so good, and I'm doing my practice every day, and I'm keeping my vows, and delight until those voices take over and start telling the other depressed, angry, pathetic, self-pity bullshit voices to go down the toilet. Excuse me, swearing twice today. It's hard work to be happy because we're addicted to misery. We've got to train the mind. Then joy will come. And this is the other point. Bliss, and this is where, if we study the mind in high school, forget Tantra, when you look at the three categories of states of mind, the first lot of the deluded, ridiculous ones, we're just dealing with attachment here. This attachment is this bottomless pit of hunger. It's dissatisfaction, a bottomless pit. I'm not enough. I haven't got enough. It's always hungry, neurotically wanting only what I want every millisecond. It is so desperate and frantic, and it won't get it from the cake or the boyfriend or from all the perfect things in the outside world. And the more you get, as my mother would say, the more you want. You just become miserable. So the point is, we do know that when you get the cake, it does trigger a moment of pleasure. Buddha's not arguing with that. His argument is, you guys, your trouble is, you think the only way to get happy feelings, pleasant feelings, and no, before I go there, let me describe where they fit in the Buddhist model of the mind. In the first model, you've got attachment and anger and jealousy and depression and anxiety and all the neuroses, these rubbish states of mind. Then you have love and kindness and generosity and forgiveness and the good ones and intelligence in the second part of the mind. The third one is like the mechanics. They're neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. They're neither negative nor positive. They're just the way we are. So one in there, shockingly, one's called concentration, intention, attention, discrimination. Many of these, everybody needs these. Whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need good concentration. It's not virtuous or non-virtuous in its nature. Now, one in that category, big surprise, is called feeling. And there's three kinds of feeling we will only ever have: pleasant, unpleasant, and indifferent. Forget the boring old indifferent. We are totally occupied with the pleasant and the unpleasant. So, of course, another word for pleasant feeling is happiness. Another word of pleasant feeling is joy. Another word for pleasant feeling is bliss. Another word for pleasant feeling is rapture. Another word for pleasant feeling is ecstasy. I mean, who's had those? Not me. But Lama Yeshe talks about it in Mahamudra because they're our natural state. They're not negative and they're not positive. But our trouble is we think attachment equals pleasure. So then we think, oh, no, I can't have pleasure. No. So we're addicted to being miserable. Pleasure is not even neither a virtue nor a non-virtue. And we try to cultivate pleasure. So Buddha's point is this. We think getting what attachment wants is the method to get a pleasant feeling. And that's the only method we have. This is the only method we have. Buddha says, sorry guys, I've found a method, okay? The Buddha's method to get pleasure, bliss, ecstasy, rapture, joy, and I'm not joking, these are the natural state of our mind when our minds are unencumbered by the delusions. So we think happiness, pleasant feelings are what we get when we get the boy, the cake, the nice politics, people doing what we think we want them to do, the food, you name it. We do get pleasure, but it lasts about 1 second. Then it's gone again. Then we've got to shove the cake in again. It's exhausting. Buddha says, no, babies. Pleasure, happiness is what you get, and it won't change into suffering again. Pleasure, happiness, joy is the natural state of your mind, and the way to get it is to give up attachment. So Lama Yeshe would say, the more pleasure, the better, dear. He tried to get us to hear it, but we can't. We hear it as, oh, that sounds a bit like a sin, you know. Are we communicating, Alexis?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. What else?
Venerable Robina, Paula from Japan has a question.
Yes, Paula, sweetheart.
This does not relate directly to me, of course. It's hypothetical.
God, of course it is, Paula. Go, darling.
You'll see why. If someone is torturing another person,
Yes,
like heavy duty,
yes,
and the tortured person is in a position to want to lessen the karmic load on the torturer,
yes.
What might do that? For example, would their forgiving completely the torturer eliminate or reduce the karma?
I understand.
That would be one.
No, I really hear it. So, I mean, I really hear it, but I think we don't even have to use examples like we just use people being mean to us, our mean sister or our mean boss or whatever. So, okay, put it like this. A person who's a bodhisattva or even got a lot of love and compassion, which means a person who's subdued their attachment, subdued their anger, has got incredible confidence. And no, if they would be a bodhisattva, even low-level bodhisattva, they'd have so much compassion for that person harming them. Like those young nuns were able to even say that. They had compassion for their torturers because they knew that they would suffer in the future. So even a person who's like at the time a person's even harming that bodhisattva, they would do everything in their power to make the other person kind of, to diminish it for the other person. There's no question. There's no question they would do everything they can because they have such compassion for that person because they can see that they're harming themselves. No question.
And that does work. It's not that comes back in a circle and just helps the bodhisattva again. But
no, I think, by doing that somehow would lessen. Yes, even if, like if someone steals from you, but you happily in your mind give it to them, that lessens the karma for sure. It can. It's very interdependent, but it has to lessen it. It has to, because something has to have an effect. It can't be just not having an effect. Of course. But right there, it could be very powerful. It depends, on the person. But it depends on the person, because another bodhisattva might see the best way to help this person is to kill them. And I'm not kidding. If they're so highly advanced and they really have wisdom and can see that the best way to help this other person stop creating negative karma is kill them. That's why they tell that story about the Buddha. Countless lives ago, before his own enlightenment, he's on this boat. And there's all these 500 merchants. And the captain is the Buddha, the previous Buddha is the captain. The previous life of the Buddha is the captain. Of course, he's highly realized, got bodhichitta, got emptiness, clairvoyance, all these qualities. And they're driven by this incredible compassion. That's all that ever drives them. And they've got this immense wisdom to see their mind way back into the future, all their karma, etc. So the story goes, there's one of these 500 merchants wants to kill everybody and steal everything. He sees it with his clairvoyance. So he's got such compassion for this guy that he feels the only way to fix it is to kill him himself and happily take on upon all himself that suffering by going to the hell realms. And so they say that not only did he not create himself, the bodhisattva in this case, not only did he not create any negative karma, he had hastened his own enlightenment. So of course he prevented from this guy from doing all that terrible negative karma. So he would have helped him. But that's an extreme example of a bodhisattva who's highly realized. They'll do whatever it's necessary to help that person lessen their negative karma, whatever it takes. That's the bodhisattva. They're very outrageous.
Thank you.
Yeah. And even an ordinary example, just a simple example, how it can be a dynamic, ongoing, interdependent scenario. Like a friend of mine who had an alcoholic husband. Who wants an alcoholic husband? Nobody. Normal people don't want a bloody alcoholic husband. But, she just decided She just decided that she realized she couldn't change him, so she just gave up wanting him to be different. You see, this is what attachment. We might be right. It's wrong to be an alcoholic. It's not cool to be an alcoholic. David's point, he's right about what he's seeing out there, these pretty heavy-duty, ridiculous people. So, but being attached to something and angry about it is another thing on top. So she decided that she decided what's best for the family. She's going to stay with it. She decided she wouldn't leave. She would just in her mind, let him be who he is. Yet she saw his good qualities. She stopped getting him to be different. She had led her own life. She was a happy human being. So, of course, everything would have been different. She would have been kind and loving instead of bullying him and shouting and demanding he go to AA. And so it's dynamic. It builds up, So if you're changing, the whole dynamic changes. That's in an ongoing relationship when you learn to forgive a person. But you've got to be brave to do that, Paula. Somebody else who's a victim, probably best to leave the boring old husband. That's what we've got to know where we're at. We've got to know what we're capable of, It's so important.
Hello, Venerable Robina.
Hello, Christopher. Talk to me, sweetheart.
So you answered Ada's question earlier about emptiness of the mind, meditating on emptiness of the mind. Is this what John Landau is referring to in his course notes as emptiness yoga, which is a precursor to the deity yoga?
I don't know. Can you read it out? Tell me what chapter or something. I have to look at it. I've got to look at it. I don't think that's the same. No, it's different. No, I think whatever he's talking about is not this. This particular technique is a sutra practice. It's a sutra practice, a method, not in Tantra, but in Sutra, of how to meditate on the mind and to begin to realize the emptiness of the mind. So I don't think it's what he's talking about.
Then my question is, I think it's page 97, he talks about...
I've got to find it. Okay, hang on a second. Let me just have a look. I'll check. Hang on a second. Using the third of the three principal aspects of the path, the wisdom of emptiness, we practice cutting through and
101 second paragraph.
What, darling? What?
You're reading it.
So if we fail to practice this emptiness yoga well, that just means understanding emptiness that just means understanding emptiness. That's all he's using. I don't use that for phrase. He just means studying emptiness properly in the sutra teachings, Christopher. That's all he means.
Okay.
Doesn't even mean Mahamudra. It means studying the proper sutra teachings. The three principal aspects of the path that he's talking about is the first one is renunciation, which comes from practicing giving up harming others and living according to vows and purifying your mind, then going to high school and working on your mind and understanding the delusions and giving up attachment. That's renunciation. Then you go to the bodhisattva path and you get bodhichitta. Then you go to the third part of the bodhisattva path, which is the 6 perfections, and you realize emptiness. That's all he's talking about. The sutra teachings on emptiness. Otherwise you won't know how to understand it in Tantra. That's all he's saying. Okay, thanks.
I was reading more into it than there is.
Yes, exactly.
On chapter 8, he talks about the bodies of the Buddha.
That's right.
I found this really fascinating.
Yeah, so what's the question?
Is coming in contact with a Rupakaya, is that a rarity or is that...
No, darling.
It talks about...
No, I understand. So there's the way they talk about, we've discussed this many times and it comes up quickly and passes away again. We haven't gone into it in great detail. Once a person's mind has become enlightened, it's just pure consciousness, okay? There's no body. They don't need a body, any kind of body whatsoever. Their mind just pervades the universe. They've got infinite wisdom, infinite compassion, etc. That's the actual meaning of the Buddha. So that's known in Sanskrit as the Dharma Kaya. And Kaya means body. It's just how they use the term here. And it's just how they call it, and it's called the truth body. So that's the actual Buddha. Then out of compassion, that enlightened mind must manifest in actual bodies to help sentient beings, okay? You with me?
Yes.
So that's called the Rupakaya form body. Then there's 2 of those. There's the deity's body, which is Tara, Chenrezig, all these depictions we're seeing in Tantra. They've actually got subtle light bodies. They don't walk around looking like human beings with naked red ladies with green skin, right? They've got subtle light bodies. That's the enjoyment body or the Sambhogakaya. And only the great Arya bodhisattvas can see them. And then there's the Nimanakaya or emanation body, which is like Shakyamuni Buddha is an example of that. So there's the 3 bodies of the Buddha. That's how they talk.
Okay. Thank you.
When we're taking refuge in the Dharmakaya?
They don't. You talk. So when you take refuge, they talk about how you take refuge in the absolute Buddha and the relative Buddha, the absolute Dharma and the relative Dharma. the absolute Sangha, and the relative Sangha. So the absolute Buddha is the Dharmakaya. Yes. The relative Buddha is the form, the body. Shakyamuni Buddha, the person behind me. That's the form body, exactly. The actual Buddha, or the absolute Buddha they talk, that's the Dharmakaya, the omniscient mind, exactly, yes. So I'm wondering if there are any questions from last night, you people who are there listening to it. Not that I'm clever or anything can answer, but you never know. Do you have any questions from last night? Anything at all that you heard or wanted to ask about? Why don't you take that opportunity now?
I do have something.
Yes, darling.
He mentioned that from the point of ultimate truth, even the Buddha does not exist.
That's right. This means we have to talk about emptiness then. Okay. I think he was quoting Chandrakirti or somebody, wasn't he? Who was it he was quoting? Somebody. So what he's mean, this is where we're now, the last 15 minutes of our time left. So he's talking about emptiness. And what we have to understand is meaning. This is always where we get so confused. His meaning that when it comes to emptiness, even the Buddha lacks inherent existence. Everything lacks inherent existence. So the key word is we have to learn, therefore, what everything is empty of inherent existence. Everything isn't empty of existence. Everything is empty of inherent existence. This is the key thing, and that's what we have to learn to understand. When we understand that word, as His Holiness said last night about the two truths, we won't become nihilistic. That's why it's so important to understand. And Don talked about this before the class, if we listened all together last night, this is so important to understand emptiness in the framework of dependent arising, in the framework of the two truths, conventional reality and ultimate reality. That's why it's so important to understand it in that framework, that we can never, His Holiness said this, but he didn't quote Tsongkhapa, but we can never fall into the abyss of the great mistake. We either, as Holiness said, we either reify everything as up there perfect and intrinsic and permanent, or we think there's nothing. We run between these two extremes. But this is the big mistake. So everything that does exist, whatever does exist conventionally, whatever does exist conventionally, a toilet, a tissue paper, a Buddha, whatever does exist conventionally must lack intrinsic existence. Everything exists, as Holiness said, because they lack intrinsic existence. Whatever exists can only exist because it's dependent arising, because it arises interdependently. And whatever arises interdependently is necessarily lacking independent existence. So inherent existence, independent existence are the same meaning. But our trouble is we don't ever think that we thought that things did exist independently. But Buddha's telling us that we all believe things do have an independent nature. That's why it's confusing to us. We never thought we thought that, but it's the main mistake we make. So when we learn to know what that means, then we can begin to understand how things don't have that existence. So whatever exists has to be a dependent arising, therefore has to lack independent existence. They're the words. All right, Ada?
Yes, so the emptiness of the mind is an eternal phenomena.
What do you mean by eternal, sweetheart?
It's always there because the mind is always there.
Eternal, okay. Emptiness of a flower that lasts for 5 minutes is not eternal, is it? It is just the way it is. So it's whatever the conventional phenomenon is. If there's something like a mind that's beginningless and endless, then obviously as long as the mind exists, the emptiness of the intrinsic nature of that mind is existing along with the mind. So of course, but if it's a flower that lasts for 5 minutes, then the emptiness of that flower also only lasts for 5 minutes. So in the answer is yes.
Yes, I get that. Thank you.
Okay, good. What else, people? From last night, anything?
I think Barbara, did you have a question?
I do have a question, and it was along the line of what Aida was just asking.
Go on then. Good, darling.
And the question is about the mind.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So that is, I mean, that's not dependent arising.
Everything, okay, Barbara, everything that exists, whether for 1 millisecond or for 1 trillion years, whatever is said to exist conventionally, a lamp, a mind, a vase, a computer, whatever is said to exist, and we first establish what that is conventionally, we've got to be all on the same page, whatever we can establish as existing as a conventional phenomenon. Would you agree that the mind, would you agree that you have a mind, Barbara?
Yes.
So you agree that therefore your mind exists. It's an existent phenomenon, isn't it?
Yes.
So therefore it is a dependent arising. Whatever exists can only exist because it exists interdependently. It exists in dependence upon its causes, it exists in dependence upon its parts, or finally it exists in dependence upon the mind designating it that. So everything that exists is a dependent arising. Things exist because they're dependent arising. Nothing that isn't dependent arising could exist. It's an impossibility. Everything has to depend upon something for its existence. So mind, even though it's beginningless and endless, minute by minute, millisecond by millisecond, is this dynamic phenomenon that's changing and that's the fruit of causes and conditions and that has parts. This moment of mind, next moment of mind, next moment of mind. So that's a dependent arising.
So is there anything at all that is not?
As I said, nothing could exist it's an impossibility for something to exist without depending upon something else. Nothing, we say it in English, nothing's set in stone. It's a really good way to put it. This is ignorance. When you're very fixed in your mind, it is this. That's fundamentalism. That's coming from ego grasping that believes there is an intrinsic, concrete, self-existent, unindependent me and you and this and that. That's the problem. Everything is interdependent. It can't exist if it weren't. So, and even everything therefore exists because it is empty of intrinsic existence. Everything exists because it is a dependent arising. That's the logic. So we just got to get used to the concepts and get them right, Barbara, and learn them and then repeat them in sentences until we get used to it. Do you understand?
Yes.
Part of the problem is our definition. We've got to get the definitions clear. And of course, in the beginning, all these words they all jumble into each other. We've got to get clear, you know. Do you understand?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. What else?
May I say something?
Who is I?
What about time?
Does
time fit into this?
Okay, does time exist? Is it a conventional phenomenon?
I don't know. I'm confused about time.
So you think no such thing as 5 o'clock? We say 5 o'clock. So 5 o'clock doesn't exist?
Yes, of course. Yeah,
okay, so
yes.
Time exists. So therefore,
yes.
So therefore it's a dependent arising. Therefore it's empty, of course. That's it.
Okay.
That's the logic. Yeah.
And what about the ultimate phenomena, Venerable?
Like what? Give an example.
Like dependent arising itself.
Oh, that's also dependent arising. Emptiness itself is also empty. There's nothing that isn't. In the Heart Sutra, it says that even. You know, whatever exists, including the emptiness. I mean, it sort of sounds like being tricky words, but it's not tricky words when we understand them. Whatever is said to exist, the emptiness of intrinsic existence of Divya exists. She's a conventional phenomenon. The emptiness of Divya also exists. So therefore it too is empty. Whatever is said to exist lacks an intrinsic nature. It's not meant to be tricky. It's literally correct. So the ultimate, including, yes indeed, the ultimate reality of things is said to be emptiness, and that is a phenomenon. It exists. Absolutely. Absolutely. In other words, if something didn't depend upon something, if something were not interdependent. See, this is Divya. This is where the Buddha diverged from the previous amazing great yogis before him, because they were still positing an intrinsic Atman, an intrinsic source called God. They, for sure, Buddha, that's where he diverged. The view, there are various views then, and Buddha, you know, his own arguments are with that view. He felt that they hadn't gone far enough. They were saying there is something intrinsic, there is something that doesn't depend. And that's very much in Christianity. It almost sounds insulting to say that God is a dependent arising. The idea is that God has to be above it all. And that's very much a view, and Buddha would argue with that view. Do you understand, Divya?
Yes, yes. So correct me. This sentence, the omniscient mind, Dhammakaya, exists in dependence of my imputation of it.
Precisely. That's the final dependent arising. There's 3 levels of dependent arising. The very first level, where Buddha argued with the first position that there's a permanent intrinsic Atman, me, self, he says, no, it's a dependent arising in terms of causes. It's the result of causes, not an uncaused thing. Then second, your mind, Divya's mind, is existing in dependence upon its parts. This moment of Divya's mind, the next moment of Divya's mind, the anger in Divya's mind, the love in Divya's mind. And then when Divya's mind becomes a Buddha mind, that mind too is existing in dependence upon causes, all the hard work you did in the past to become the Buddha mind. That mind also has this moment of mind and that moment of mind. And finally, the subtlest one, which we haven't been talking about, the subtlest one is that it's designated by mind. That from the side of omniscient mind, that's what Ida mentioned it, even the Buddha's empty. From the side of the mug, from the side of the hell realm, from the side of the Buddha, whatever it is, it's finally merely labeled. Now, His Holiness, another time in another teaching, he said, we do the earlier part of the work we have to do is to search for the inherent me, the inherent mind, or the inherent whatever it is we think we're looking into the emptiness of. And so we have to try and find something. We think we were going to find something there that is intrinsic. So he said, when you do search and you're looking for the I inside the body and the mind, we're convinced that the little I in there must be a little piece in there called I, along with the toenails and the eyes and the ears and the nose. No, you won't find one of those little pieces called I. We don't need one. So as His Holiness said, the I isn't empty of independent existence because you can't find one, and you won't. That's not the real premise. The I is empty of independent existence because it's a dependent arising, in particular because it's merely labeled, it's merely designated. And that's the toughest one, that's the hardest one to get.
Great, thank you.
Good,
thank you so
thank
much,
you.
Venerable.
Well, it's time to go, all you people. We didn't talk much about Tantra at all, but it doesn't matter. So that's the end of our little series of courses, isn't it, Mary Morganberg?
Well, Miss Susie from London has a question.
Oh, good, Susie. For God's sake, it's 3 a.m. These crazy English girls. I mean, look at it. It's 4 a.m, Susie. Come on, girl. Go back to bed. God almighty.
I can email you the question if you like.
No, say the question for everybody's sake. Come on.
Okay, so you've talked about this, but I just have some pieces missing that I'm confused about.
Okay.
And it's the link between the body and the mind.
Good, okay.
So when I dance, and I don't mean in the way that I used to dance professionally, which seems so grim to me now.
Grim. It's a very English word. They say grim. I like it. It's a good word. Grim.
Feels really repulsive.
Okay, go on. Go on.
And all
so go
that
on.
Shit, but
anyway.
When I dance privately for myself, with no concern about how I look, just the freedom of it, I feel mentally very together and centered in a really brilliant way.
Yes, exactly.
But I'm starting to question that and doubt.
No, I understand that. I hear it,
because...
darling. Nothing wrong. I'll tell you. Okay. Let's analyze. Okay, let's analyze it. Anybody who goes jogging, who's a sports person, I know when I did my Kung Fu, I do every 6 days a week. I was training in London when I was there in the 80s, and I'd do 3 hours a day, and I'd come home exhausted but blissful. Because your mind is focusing, Susie, and the mind and the body are intimately connected. So when you kind of got the mind flowing, and there's some joy there, because it's coming from attachments. Okay, there is joy. Then the mind is light, and then the body is light. That's exactly correct. But honey child, birds have it, and dogs have it, and lions have it. So there's nothing virtuous in its nature. Bliss itself is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. It's what attachment is hungry for. So when we get it, that's what we mean by happiness. And it is happiness. But the point is this: if the motivation is just to have that, which is our normal motivation, it won't last. And then you'll get depressed again and miserable, and then you get greedy. So if whatever we do, this is the bodhisattva path, Susie. When we do the Bodhisattva path, you're going to eat your dinner. You're not a yogi living in the mountains naked without dinner yet. You've got to have your dinner. So it is driven by attachment. Dancing, of course, is driven by attachment. They are in their nature driven by attachment. But because we've got access to our virtues, we can add virtue into the mix. You can think, this is going to be my practice for 10 minutes to relax my mind, so I can be a good mum, so I can be a good husband. And then it becomes a virtuous action right there. That's the brilliance of the Bodhisattva approach. You can add the bodhichitta to the mix. So if you're going to do your jogging or whatever it is, of course it's going to bring some pleasure. That's neither good, that's not virtue. That's why people think mindfulness meditation is so holy. No, excuse me, thieves need mindfulness. It might bring some pleasure, but we conflate pleasure, especially if it's done while you're sitting down or doing something holy. It must be holy pleasure. No, pleasure is pleasure is pleasure. So you put bodhicitta into it, and then suddenly it's still the pleasure, but you've done it for a good reason. So that's what transforms it. So it's skillful means, baby. Do you understand?
Okay, thank you so much.
Do you understand?
Yeah, thank you.
Good, Susie. All right, petals. That'll do for now. I'll see you all again somewhere, sometime. I don't know. Who knows? We don't all die. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all.
Thank you, Robina.
Much love, people.
Thank you so much.
And may bodhicitta grow and grow in the hearts of all. Jangchob, Semchog Rinpoche, Ma Kye Panam Kye Guchig, Kye Panyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Pelba Shog. And may we never. No, that's enough. Okay. Nothing more to say? That's it? We're all done? Okay, so let's say we do it together with a good attitude, good motivation, that all the holy beings in the universe live long, and this little prayer that Lama Zopa wrote, okay, we'll say it, Rinpoche's holy words. Why not? It's an auspicious way to end this little course we've just done. Thank you so much. Let's just do it. Okay, we'll do the long life prayers of Lama Zopa and Lama Ursel Rinpoche. So you who uphold the Buddha's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honouring the three jewels, Saviour of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Go on. And then Lama Ursel, Venerable One, to use kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places. We're especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long.